You either use the internet for fun or you use the internet to grow. You're here to grow. Welcome to TRS Clips. And I have to ask you what the best and worst thing about being a diplomat is.
So the best thing, your life is pretty rich, basically. So you experience a lot more than other people do. So look, I lived in Morocco for 3 years and then in New York for 3 years. And then I was back in Berlin. And then I went to Afghanistan. I lived for a year in the most remote area of Afghanistan. Not even in Kabul, but in the most remote area in Afghanistan.
Wait. Forget that question, sir.
Happy to talk about, So I lived in Kunduz, which is in northern Afghanistan. It's a city which is one of the centers in northern Afghanistan. And I was the head of what we call a provincial reconstruction team, where 550 soldiers and a small group of diplomats tried to, change a bit or support, let's say, the government institutions in this area. And that was a very tough job.
When was this? Which year was
2006 and 2007.
This is at the peak of the war on terror and all that.
It was basically when I came in 2006, the mood was perfect. Everybody was happy. We were building schools and streets, and it was really... And then the Taliban came back in early 2007, in April. They started really attacking local security institutions and then also the German army. So I was unfortunately there when a big attack happened.
Really? You've lived through an attack?
Yeah. I mean, I was not directly attacked, but we lost 3 soldiers.
You mean on the embassy?
On this very strange provincial reconstruction team. So 550 German soldiers and a handful of diplomats. So 3 of these soldiers were killed on the market. And, it was very mean and heinous, this attack, because not only that they killed the soldiers, but the Bazaris, of course, they were so afraid of receiving Germans as clients after that, because they said, we might go, we might be shot or, bombed because of that. And so there was the relationship between the local population and the Germans deteriorated after that. So basically, when I left, the situation was much worse than when I came. Really? And in hindsight, we have to say that, we failed. We failed in Kunduz. We tried our best, but we failed.
You say you failed because you said that the main skill for being a diplomat is communication. And somehow you weren't able to talk to Afghan hearts.
No, I think basically I would say that we talked to Afghan hearts a lot. We said we said one thing at the beginning. We said, security and development are interdependent. If there is more security, there is more development. If there is more development, there is more security. That's wrong. It turned out to be wrong, because it's first security, and then comes development. And what happened was that the people of Kunduz and in the neighboring provinces, you cannot imagine I was in every village in this area, and I think there are very few Afghans who have seen so much of Afghanistan in comparison to me. But
you've seen a lot of interior Afghanistan.
Yeah, I was in every village. I mean, I was in the most remote villages. I was in villages where the women could not leave the houses. They would not be allowed to leave the houses. So we offered, courses in hygiene and birth control for women. And the people who did it, they went from house to house, because you couldn't even gather the women in some common place, even without men. But they would not be allowed to. I mean, you must imagine that the woman, once she marries, cannot leave the house for the rest of her life. I mean, it's very, very strange. So I've seen a lot of things that are so strange to our... But what I wanted to say is that we spoke to the hearts of the Afghans as long as they felt secure. The moment the Taliban came, again, they realized that the Germans would not prevent them from bombing, because they were in the mountains and we were only 550 soldiers. And they said, okay, now what should I do as a family in Afghanistan? Should I listen to the Taliban, or should I listen to the Germans, or should I do both? Because you never know what happens. We have lived 30 years or 20 years of war, and now all of a sudden there is war again. So basically what I felt was at the end that we spoke to the Afghans, we interacted with them, but they always had this little door open towards the Taliban, because they knew that someday they might come back.
Out of fear.
Out of fear. And when you ask me, where did we fail as diplomats? And I will tell you one thing in hindsight, we didn't know enough about Afghanistan. We just didn't know enough. Culturally, we didn't know the DNA, we didn't know the problems of Afghanistan, and we were not well enough prepared, basically.
Did you meet any Taliban members?
Yes, I did.
What's it like talking to them?
They are very courteous and extremely, formal, I would say. You can discuss with them, but they're very, very conservative, in a traditional way conservative, and they are ideologues. They are of the opinion that they know what the real Islam is. Nobody else does it, only them. And that makes them so secure. They say, there is no other country in the world, Muslim country in the world, that would not let women go to university. Not a single one, only Afghanistan. And they feel that they have found the truth. It's like they are not open to discussions because they say this is the true and only Islam, and we are following the rules of. And that's very difficult to break through to them. So it's okay to talk to them, but you don't get very far, actually, I would say.
Were there any women on your team?
We had one woman. And, when I started, we had a great interaction with women. I will tell you a story which is quite interesting. In Germany, the burkha, you remember this blue thing, this is the worst. Everybody thinks that this is the discrimination of women, is the burkha, is the worst of the worst. So when I came home and I talked about Afghanistan, everybody talks about burkha all the time. So this is an obsession in Germany saying that. And I understand that. And it's also my obsession because I find it absolutely horrific, these burqas. But when I talked to the women of Kunduz, and there were some very emancipated women, teachers, female teachers, also some doctors, and they said, the burqa is the least of our problems. They said, what is our problem? Our problem is the role in the household, that we can't work. If we get work, I'm happy to wear a burqa. It's just, you have to have a different role in society. The burqa is such, we can cope with that, but not with the fact how we are treated in society. So for them, the burqa was not so important, I would say, although I think they would have preferred not to wear it, but it's not that. And then they also say, the moment you wear a burqa, people respect you. If you don't wear a burqa, then people the women got harassed a bit. So burqa was also a protection shield in a way. That's sad enough. Yeah, it's not a good reason to wear a burqa, But I would say that our perception, and when I say we didn't know enough about Afghanistan, was that with our view, the Western view on things in Afghanistan, we didn't get very far. Our idea is tainted. It's a biased idea of Afghanistan. We were not aware of the intricacies, and so. Another example. Are you okay with my example?
Go for it. You have a crazy life story.
Yeah,
I'm just listening.
So in Kunduz, in Afghanistan, so there are many ethnicities. Like in India, you have Tajiks, and you have Pashtus, and you have Hazara. And so this region where I was in the 30s, now that's basically 70 years ago, was for ethnic reason, the central government sent Pashtu settlers. Pashtus are in the south, Tajiks are. They sent Pashtu settlers to this region, so 70 years ago. They fled during the civil war, these Pashtu settlers, after 50 years living in Kunduz, they fled to Pakistan, and then they came back. So the population of the Tajiks didn't want them back. So they said to me, you Germans, you have to see to it that these people don't come again. And I said, come on, guys, they have been living here for 50 years. I mean, they had houses, they had land, and yes, but they are strangers. They never belonged to this texture. Then I told the story I told you from the refugees from Czechoslovakia who, basically contributed to make my hometown and the region a very prosperous one. So they wouldn't hear of it. And this is something where we Germans could not do anything. This is such a complicated conflict between the ethnicities in Afghanistan, that with our knowledge and with our manpower, we could not rule, and the government did nothing. They felt it is too hot a potato. They would not.
Again, this is down to a lack of education. And I also want to highlight something I actually learned from a trip I had to Israel very long ago. When they wanted to teach Hebrew to the whole population after World War II, they decided that it should be compulsory for all the girls to learn Hebrew till the age of 18, but it's okay if the guys only learn it till a certain age because women become mothers who then teach the families.
Very smart. Very smart.
Here, if you're preventing girls from education, you're actually preventing a population from education as well.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what we did in Afghanistan. Big time. We did girls' schools everywhere. And, with a lot of money and a lot of heart and a lot of conviction. And I think they're all closed.
Did the Taliban members treat your female team members differently?
Yeah, but, we did not talk to the Taliban in Kunduz. We talked to the Taliban in a later stage. I was then basically the deputy special representative for Afghanistan in Berlin. And we tried to then initiate a dialogue with the Taliban in order to get them into some government of national unification, of a sort of a national reconciliation government. And that also failed. So we talked with Taliban later, the sort of the diplomatic representation of Taliban. So I brought one of these Taliban. I brought them Talibs, as we should. I brought him to Berlin in order to sit down and get a little. That's what you do as a diplomat. It's a culture far away. We don't agree on anything basically with the Taliban. On nothing we agree. But you have to build up some chemistry. So what I did was, I thought, how do you deal with such a person in Berlin? Berlin, Western capital, very liberal, full of crazy people.
Took him to a nightclub?
Yeah, like this, there are lots of gay people and this is the worst for Taliban in a way. So I thought, what would you do? So I thought we bring them to the Islamic collection of the Berlin museums in order to show him that Germany has a huge respect for Islamic art and civilization. And he thought that was quite interesting. But he said when he get out of this museum, you have not been to Berlin, but what you see is that in the midst of Berlin, the worst fights of the Second World War were happening in early 45. So in the last month of the war, you had fierce fighting in Berlin. And in the middle of Berlin, the heart where this museum island is, you see these traces of the war everywhere. You see holes and in the walls, from bullets. You see parts of the buildings are still destroyed. And in order to remember the horrors of war, the government decided to keep this, the holes, to keep that sort of the memories of the war. Basically, they're very visible and they're very well preserved, like a monument. And this was the thing that the Talib was completely flabbergasted about. I said, why don't you repair that? He says, I said, we want to keep it to show that on this in this very location, in 45, nobody went to the museum, but they hid behind trees or fled because there was fierce fighting. And the city was basically a battlefield. And we hate this idea, but we should remember it. And that was, for him, he was thinking time and again about this, the horrors of war will be preserved to show the people how bad war is. That made an impression of him. It was not very useful, as you see, but at least that was something he reacted to.
All those girls' schools that you guys built and other developmental projects, do you know what's happened to them now that the Taliban's taken over?
It's a very good question because I'm wondering very often, I have been so involved with this. Emotionally, it's very difficult also to see that this is all gone. There is we built a huge hospital in Mazar Sharif. I think that might work. An airport, also roads, and I think this infrastructure is still there. But the schools, I think they're all closed. I don't know what they do with the schools. I don't know. Nobody has been there. We don't have an embassy there. We don't have diplomatic relations. And the Taliban at the beginning, we thought, okay, they will be turned, once they take over, they might be a little more realistic. And the ones with whom we talked, they said, yeah, you will see, we'll allow girls to school and go to university, and you see what happens. Nothing. Nothing.
New clips released at the same time that a podcast releases. This is TRS Clips. Make sure you subscribe.